Recording. Okay. Good morning. We're in the UK here, and I have the great pleasure for my first Zoom author spotlight of the fellow UK author who lives not far away from me in leafy Buckinghamshire, Denise Beddows. So
Hi.
we'll go. Morning. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll go right back to the beginning. Would love to know how you got writing. And what can you remember what the first thing was you wrote?
Well, I had a dad who was a very keen reader. He lived half his life down the public library getting books out and the rest sitting by the fire when he wasn't working,
Oh,
reading.
yeah.
So he used to make me, he taught me to read when I was about 3 or 4. And he used to make me tiny little booklets from old offcuts of wallpaper and used to stitch them together. And he'd say, go
Wow.
and write me a little book, write me a
Oh,
story.
how
So
sweet.
I used to do a lot of that. And then
Mm,
all through my career, I was 37 years in government service, so I had to write reports, which of course are not in any way really creative,
mm.
unless I didn't know what I was talking and writing about, in which case it would be creative. Um, but essentially, it was towards the end of my career, I was overseas, and I didn't. It wasn't that I had a lot of downtime. It was the fact that I was mostly working from home, being on call 24/7.
Mm,
So when I wasn't answering the phone and dealing with work, I
mm.
could actually write. So that's when I wrote
Okay.
my first actual novel.
Mm. So your work inspired your writing, or was
It
it
did
something you
later
loved
on.
anyway? Right.
Well, I was actually a researcher and an investigator and also an intelligence analyst. So
Mm.
a lot of research comes naturally to me. In fact, if I've not got a project to research, I tend to get a bit
Okay.
twitchy.
Yeah.
So I started researching my own family history and found 4 murders, which was gave
Wow.
me plenty to write about. So
Absolutely.
I actually wrote sort of biographical fiction. My first 2 books
Mm.
were based on characters in my family.
Okay.
And then I went on to, when I came back, I joined a local history society, well, a little
Mm.
group run by my parish council. And
Okay.
so I started researching local history around the Chalfonts and around Buckinghamshire,
Mm.
and wrote several books based on local history, and they
Okay.
sell really well locally. It's a sort of a niche market, but they keep
Mm.
selling.
Mm.
And then I thought, I was in a little writers group I ran, and one of the writers there was an extremely prolific thriller writer. And I said, "Oh, I couldn't ever do that. I couldn't write a thriller."
Mm.
And he said, "You probably could, you don't know what you can do till you
No,
try."
exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I thought, well, I've got all this background in travel and living overseas and
Mm.
intelligence work, and I thought there must be something in there I can write about.
Mm.
So I sat down and did that, and it worked really well. And I started by writing 5 standalone thrillers, but they're in a potentially in a series.
Mm.
And they all got to into the top 5 in bestsellers in Amazon.
Wow.
And then I got 2 number 1s. So I
Mm.
thought, well, I must be doing something right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So do you find, because you write fiction and non-fiction, do you find non-fiction easier because you know it's fact, or do you sort of easier or prefer writing fiction because you can literally just fly, the plotter and pantser, fly by the seat of your pants and see what happens?
Well, I do like to do 2 at the time. I'll be working
Mm.
on something on a thriller, on fiction. But at the same time, I'll be working on my next true crime book because I particularly like true crime. I like to investigate cold cases and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And in fact, it was my most recent true crime novel, The Forgotten 44, which actually was shortlisted for the True Crime Awards.
Wow.
So I got to go there, and it won a highly commended.
Mm.
Um, but you're right, it's very different. You do all your research and you plot out how the book's going to go, and you basically just sit down and write it, and you put in images and just chop and
Mm.
change it a bit.
Mm.
But when you're actually doing creative fiction, as you all know very well,
Mm.
um, some people have writer's block. I tend not to, but I often come to a crossroads where I can see the story going one of several different ways,
Mm.
and I can't decide. So I usually
Right.
sleep on it, and then when I
Okay.
wake up in the morning, the little fairies in the head have done
Yeah.
all the work,
Yeah.
and
See,
it's there.
the advantage of writing two things at once, do you find if you get to a point where with one where you say you've got a block, because it does Mark Billingham is famous for saying, well, there's no such thing as writer's block because plumbers don't have plumber's block. But you do get to a point, and I'm sure he must get to a point where he doesn't know what's going to happen next. And I work on at least two things at once, because then if you get stuck on one, then you can just switch to the other. And in a way, as you say, at night or while you're working on something else, you can then, your subconscious then carries on with that and decides which route to go. Or perhaps even if you've got three different avenues, you could try all three and see which you prefer up to a
Yes,
point.
yes, you can if you've got the
Yeah.
time and the
Yeah.
headspace. Yes, it's
Yeah.
a
I suppose
good
you could
idea.
outline, do a Frederick Forsyth and outline the three and
Mhm.
see which you prefer. Because you never know, you might use the other two. Because it always disheartens me when people say, oh, I wrote 10,000 words yesterday. And then when I read them today, they were rubbish. So I deleted them. You
Oh,
never know where they're going to be useful for something
mm,
else. Do you find
yes.
when you're because now you're a full-time writer, do you find that you have blocks where you write? Do you have set days, or you write for a certain time of day and that's it? Or
Well, I tend to write every morning because I'm an early bird. I'm always wide awake about 5 o'clock, winter and
mm,
summer, and
yep,
uh, sometimes I wake up with ideas in my head how the story's going to go,
mm,
or a line of research if it's to do with non-fiction.
right,
So I'll wake up with the head's sort of pumping, and I think I have to get up
yeah,
quickly and go and grab a cup of tea and
right,
sit down and get the keyboard out.
yeah,
So that the other thing, of course, there's like a lot of writers, I keep a notebook and pencil by the bed because if I wake up and I don't quite feel like, if it's chilly and I don't want to get
sure,
out of bed, I can put
yeah,
the lamp on and start writing down my
yeah,
ideas.
yeah,
But always mornings and almost every morning. And I
right,
usually have a good 2 or 3 hours where nobody else is about and it's
okay,
nice and quiet.
yeah, yeah. Have you ever considered writing other genres? Because I mean, the local history sounds sort of crime elements too, if it's not
Mhm.
literally about murderers. Have you considered writing other genres?
Well, yes, it's funny you should say that because when the Crime Writers Association brought out two new daggers, and one of them was a cozy crime dagger,
Mm,
I started taking note of some of the statistics, and obviously, crime is what the biggest overall genre, biggest
mm,
seller, but
mm,
cozy crime is possibly the biggest seller within that, the subgenre. And
mm,
I thought maybe I should be trying cozy crime.
right.
And so I looked at some of my characters that I already write about who are in MI5's counter-espionage unit. And I
Mm,
thought, well, they're only a few years off retirement, this particular couple. So
oh,
maybe I could have them in retirement solving crimes
yes.
locally. So
Yes, what a good idea.
I've started one
Yeah.
already.
There's sort
Yeah,
of Rosemary and Thyme. Was it Rosemary and
exactly.
Thyme? TV
Yeah,
series, that kind of thing. Then there's Midsummer
hmm,
Murders, and they're sort of a lower level, aren't they, with
yeah.
those? Well, I write crime and women's fiction, but I always seem to somebody's either widowed or someone's died, and or in the serial data, one of the guys she meets, he's told their son that his mother's died, but she's actually run off with another woman. So there's something kind of therapeutic about if you almost imagine one of your characters, the one who you're going to kill off, being somebody in real life that you don't like, then there's quite
Mhm.
a therapy to it. To imagine that's
Absolutely.
yeah. I had my last house. I had a next door neighbour who was just nobody liked him, and he was very anti women, and so he got bumped off quite a few times.
Good. So it should be.
Yes,
In fact,
absolutely.
another funny thing is there was a murder around this area. Oh, we're going back nearly 60 years, and
Mm,
it never ever got solved. It's still a cold
right.
case,
Wow.
but the police have lost all their files on their paperwork.
Mm,
But some years ago now, an author came along and decided to write about it, a true crime account.
mm,
But she decided who had done the murder, and I really wasn't persuaded about that.
right.
That she just picked on this one rather strange local man and thought he must have
Okay.
been the killer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I decided to read her book again and to go over all the local information, all the press reports, to see
Mm,
whether there was another book to be written in there with another hypothesis.
mm,
But in fact, when I realised how little official paperwork there was,
mm,
um, what I did instead was I've made that murder with obviously different characters, names and all, the
Sure.
theme of my
As a
cozy crime.
okay.
So my MI5 people in retirement are going to solve a murder based on the one that really happened locally.
Right, right. Great idea. You mentioned earlier on, because you are with a publisher, and we were talking before the recording about the fact that your ebook is out and you're still waiting for the paperback. How did you find that publisher? Are they the first people who published your
No,
books?
actually, for quite a while I self-published because I'd never thought of myself as a control freak. But when I saw what happened to a couple of writer friends whose books were turned out to be a bit of a disaster, and they couldn't get the rights back to put them right. In
Right.
fact, one guy was getting death threats. It was quite a serious
Wow.
incident.
Yeah.
But I thought to myself, well, I'll control the whole process, what the
Mm,
book looks like, the content, the cover, everything.
mm,
But then when I wrote The Kohat Connection, which is a book based in Pakistan, more mainly in Pakistan,
mm.
a friend of mine had the writer John Marley. He'd just been taken on by Spellbound Books, and
Mm.
he said maybe you should pitch to them.
Right.
So I pitched my Pakistan-based book to Sarah Wilson, who's the CEO of the company,
Okay.
and she's of Pakistani British origin herself. So she said, "Oh, if it's in
Right.
Pakistan, I definitely want to have a
Yeah.
look." She
Yeah.
said, "I haven't seen anyone write anything based in Pakistan."
Sure.
Because I lived there for a few years and absolutely loved
Mm,
the place.
mm.
So when she read the book, she said, "We'll have it. That's it." So
Right.
they
Wow.
published that last book, and they've just published my new book, which is actually set in Moscow. So
Okay.
it doesn't have to be written in Pakistan.
No. No.
So Spellbound, it's a nice independent publisher, and I'm with them at the moment.
Okay. Because the great thing about, because I'm at the moment I was hybrid, so I was published by a smallish, medium-sized publisher, and also self-published. And they, I find with traditional publishing, it's very different. I think with a small press is that they will push and push for their authors, and that frees up the time because there are publishers who don't necessarily, obviously to a certain point, the authors should do some marketing and do events
Mhm.
like talks like this and the events that we'll mention shortly with that you host. Um, and because then it frees up the time for the author to then write and
Mhm.
get more books to them. So it's a bit of a, not really a vicious circle, but if you're self-published, you have to do all the marketing.
Mhm.
If you're traditionally published, you lose some control, which is what I
Mhm.
like. I like being able to decide what I want to do with my books. But equally, it takes up so much time. Whereas at least with
Yes.
both, there's a balance
Mhm.
there
That's
between.
true. I recently I met at the True Crime Awards. I met another writer, a lovely girl who is published by a very, very large publishing outfit, an
Mm,
international one.
mm,
And she actually said that that particular massive publishing house, they concentrate all their efforts on promotion on
mm.
the more famous of their writers, whereas the
Right.
lesser known writers, they're just left to get on with
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And yet they're taking a huge chunk of the royalties. So
Right.
there's a balance to be struck, I think.
Mm,
If you get a good publisher who are happy to let you do a lot of the promotion,
mm.
and if you're good at doing promotion, then why not, really?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think obviously the more, if they've got a good marketing team, because I think I'd only go with a publisher who is a really good marketeer. You see their books everywhere, and they do well. But they do tend to, publishers tend to, they have the budget from their top authors to be able to take on names as a bit of a risk that if
Mhm.
you don't have any kind of track record, then they have the budget to do that. But I totally get that they concentrate on their top names because that's what people have heard of.
Mhm.
But it's lovely to think because I've been to a lot of literary festivals, and looking forward to the one that you're running in September for us, and I've been to some award ceremonies as part of like Theakston's. They have the award ceremony on the Thursday night. Do you find, apart from the fact that it's a brilliant networking event, that having awards under your belt does make a difference?
I think it does really. I mean, I found it quite difficult to sit down and start rewriting my author bio to describe myself as an award-winning,
Mm,
best-selling author.
mm,
But my daughter said to me, "But you've won 3 or 4 awards,
mm,
and you've had books at #1 on Amazon. So
mm.
you have to describe yourself as award-winning
Yeah,
and best-selling. Otherwise, you're underselling yourself, and people
absolutely.
won't buy your book."
No.
So it kind of sticks in the craw a bit,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
boast.
Yeah.
But on
Because
the
the
other hand, people take you seriously.
Yes. And because there is the label where somebody will go, because on Amazon, if you're the number one in a particular um area, a particular category, then you get the gold ribbon banner for a day or a month or however long you're there. And then it's lovely to shout about. But then when you go with some authors, if they say, oh, I'm a #1 Amazon bestseller, and then you look to see what category they're in, and it might be cozy crime with kittens and knitting and cookery,
Mm.
all in the same, that kind of, minutiae of categories, which is a lovely feeling to know
Mm.
that, because I'm very much a writer to be read. I mean, yes, it'd be lovely to make a living out of it, but I think most writers, just the thrill of knowing that somebody's bought their book. I don't know how often you check your stats, um, but it's lovely first thing in the morning just to see a little increment where one person
Mm.
has bought, whether it's a novel or a diary or something, to know, do you check that? Or I know it's detached with
Yes.
when you get your royalty statements, obviously from your
Mhm.
publisher, whether
Yeah,
whether you're
it's
involved.
difficult. I do from time to time, but quite honestly, I forget or I'm busy doing something else. But it's funny when you mention the being #1 in a very sort of narrow genre kind of
Mm,
thing. Because my publisher and I had agreed that we would put my book set in Pakistan through as maybe Pakistani noir or
mm,
Pakistan crime, and I thought I'm bound to get to #1 with that.
yeah.
But Amazon wouldn't do it. They didn't have
Okay.
that category, so
Right.
it went down in 3 categories, one of which was completely wrong. But
Right.
it did manage to be their #1 bestseller, and
Mm,
also got to #1 in their Kindle sales as well. That's
that's
top, sorry,
amazing.
top, beg your
Yeah.
pardon, top 100 in the Kindle
Yeah.
sales,
That's
because
amazing.
that's a much bigger field.
Mm,
But I missed out on the boat of being Pakistani noir.
right. Right. Oh, maybe if people more write, or you write more, or other people write more, maybe they'll. But yes, Amazon's a very, it is wonderful being able to write a book and get it out there. But yes, a force to be reckoned with, I think.
Mhm.
So, what's the best thing? I mean, do you read your reviews?
I do every day,
Do you?
and I watch them build up very slowly. And I
Right.
keep,
Right.
and I keep urging some of the people I know who are little fans of mine, and I
Yeah.
say, do get round to writing me a review. I
Yes.
love your reviews,
Yes.
but it's they come in slowly, don't they?
Yeah. Do you ever get disheartened by the not so great ones?
Well, I've only had 2 really not so great ones. One
Right.
was a person who had completely misunderstood a book I wrote, and he felt moved to say, "You've got the facts completely wrong. The West Surrey Regiment was never in India." And I
Right.
pointed out the book was about the East Surrey Regiment, and they
Oh,
were in India. So that's kind of annoying because
yes,
they've knocked your stars back.
absolutely.
But like a lot of writers, I do seem to have a troll who follows me around and gives me like a 1 or 2 star rating for every book without leaving a
Right.
comment.
Right.
There's nothing you can do about that.
No, no, that's crazy. So
Mm.
is there, would you say that the good side and bad side of writing? What's the best thing and the worst thing about either writing itself or the industry? We'll go with the best
Um,
thing. Start with the best thing.
The best thing I think is it gives you a sense of purpose, and particularly when, I mean, like me, I took early release from my career,
Mm,
mainly because I wanted a break. I didn't want to go living overseas. I wanted to spend more quality time with the family,
mm,
and I also wanted to actually write seriously.
mm,
So the best aspect really is having the time and the sense of purpose, and a sense of being somebody, because On my father's side, we're from a long line of sort of Ulster Protestants, and they all have this kind of ethic about work, that
Right.
a man is only as good as the job he does, and if
Yeah.
you haven't got a job, then you're a failure.
Right.
So I've always been brought up to think you have to be doing something and doing it to the best of your
Mm,
ability.
mm,
Sitting back, just going on holiday or what have you. But the flip side of that, the worst aspect I think of writing is that you get so little time to read.
right.
I mean, I hardly read fiction these days. If I
Mm,
do, it's as a favor to a friend, so I can review
right.
a writer friend's book. But
Okay.
a lot of I have stacks and stacks of books by the bed here in my study everywhere
Mm.
that I'm waiting to read, and I'm too busy reading reference books for
For
background
research.
research.
Yeah. Do you find that when you do research, you go off track? Because social media is terrible if you're on looking at Google and it takes you somewhere else. And
Absolutely. And in fact, I've been doing research for one book and I've come across a gold mine of information, which I thought there's another book in that. So I've suddenly gone off piste completely,
right,
got a
right.
new notebook out and started
Yeah,
making notes for a
yeah.
book I hadn't even started.
Okay.
So yeah, that is awful.
Yeah,
I'm very easily sidetracked.
right. Do you find that as a writer your reading has changed? Because my day job's editing, so I actually just read short stories because I find that they're my favorite format, but also that they're over before I can get too critical. Whereas the last novel I wrote, which actually was a pretty thin one, was when I was in Germany last but one time. And I got to about page 7. And there was I think it might have been, it was a Henning Mankell, so it could have been the translation of it. But I can't even remember the sentence now. But it was so bad that I put it on Facebook. And most of the friends on Facebook are writers or readers or both. And it sort of blew up that it didn't get through at least the English editors,
Oh,
that it wasn't it's a shame I can't remember what it was now, but and so I find I get partway through a novel and I just go, yeah, but that wouldn't happen, or that you
mhm,
said it was blue on page 12 and
mhm.
now it's green or something like that. Do you find as a writer that you read differently?
Absolutely. It is hard not to be critical, particularly if you obviously read books in the genre that you like, and presumably the genres that you like to write in.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I was reading a book recently which was reasonably well written, but it was true crime, and the author, who should have known better, kept referring to the Crown Prosecution Service, but mistakenly as the Crime Prosecution Service,
Oh.
and there was several mentions of that through the book, and
Mm.
my first thought was, oh, that's awful. Fancy making that mistake. Then I thought,
Right.
you have to be forgiving and you have to say to yourself, it's maybe Hereditor was at fault. They
Yeah.
should have picked that
Yes,
up.
that's the thing. I was just going to say that's an editor's job because
Mm,
I have to check everything, even if I know it's right. I have a stand that my Kindle goes in because when I'm editing, I email the Word document to my Kindle, the Kindle
hmm
Fire, and it reads out to me. So it reads as it's, rather than me looking, I say for the though, through, thought, tough, trough, all
hmm
those, that it reads as it's written. So
Ah.
so that's why I have that as an audio. And but she will, I say she because it's a female voice. So she will go, the wind, he has a wound on his arm because it's spelt the same, and there was the wind through the trees. And so if I know something's right, I have to double check it. So on this stand at the front, I have sellotaped, "You have the right to remain silent." So whenever that comes up, I
Mm,
literally get, even though I know it,
mm,
I just check as it's reading it out aloud that that's correct. So yes, an editor should have spotted that.
mhm.
So how do you find? Presumably, you had an editor or at least a proofreader for your self-publishing, and you have an editor with the publisher. How do you
Uh-huh.
find that process? Are they quite forgiving of you, or
Yes, actually, I'm very lucky. Nikki East is not only my editor, she designs the covers as well, which, are
okay?
beautiful. I love her
Mm,
artwork.
mm,
But yeah, it's she's very good at picking up. I mean, hopefully, I don't do too many typos or grammatical sort of
mm,
spelling errors.
mm,
But she picks up on things that I write about. Maybe I put a bit of jargon in that
mm,
is everyday to me, everyday use,
mm,
but that the public might not know. For example, for 37 years, I held a warrant, which was an identity document, an official
Okay.
identity.
Mm.
And so I'm used to saying I showed my warrant, or he presented his warrant to the
Right.
senior investigating officer.
Yeah.
And she said, I think you need to say warrant card
Mm.
because a Joe Public won't know what you're talking about.
No.
And
Uh,
it hadn't occurred to me. I thought she's right.
Yeah. See, although I'm an editor, I have an editor for my writing. And I think it's because most people think when an editor is just going to pick up your spelling mistakes or if something is incorrect, but he often comes up with brilliant ideas. Oh, how about instead of this, just you try this? And I find with writing that there you have to, and I give this feedback as to my authors, that you have to trust that the reader will understand something without explaining so much, because you'll show a scene, which is the ideal. And then, so the example I give is Andy was, rather than say Andy was angry, he slammed his fist on the desk and get out.
Mm.
And so you trust the reader to judge that he was angry. And so there's a fine balance as a writer and an editor between giving enough information that you rely on the reader being intelligent enough. And also it's about the context.
Mhm.
You know, if you
Yes.
plonk a warrant in something in a scene that it's not relevant, then that's
Mhm.
really going to throw them.
To baffle them. Yeah,
Yes,
it's
exactly.
true.
So
In
it's
fact,
finding the balance.
it's quite funny because Nikki knows her way around a pub. I'm not sure she's been a pub landlady at some point, but she gets involved in noir at the bar. So where I'd recently written about somebody ordering a craft beer, she said, no, it'd be a
Mm.
cask beer. You want a cask
Okay,
beer. So I thought,
right.
fine, I'll defer to your expert knowledge because
Okay,
I don't drink beer. So
right. No, I don't either. My father-in-law is a big beer drinker,
you've got an expert
and
on hand.
exactly, yes, and brother-in-law as well. They're yes, they know their stuff. But it's funny because you go in the supermarkets and they sell it as craft beer.
Mhm.
But yes, a cask, because I worked behind a bar on and off as I was growing up,
Mhm.
and so yes, we got that. So have there been we talked about the best thing about writing and the worst thing. Have there been any sort of real stumbling blocks or hurdles you've had to overcome?
Um, Not really. I think the only thing is, I mean, I think I'm probably more a pantser than a plotter.
Mm,
So, whereas I know some people will sit down and write the entire outline, what happens in every chapter and so
mm,
on, I always know how my book's going to begin and I know how it's going to end.
mm.
It's the bit in the middle that I stumble over.
Yes,
So,
and not
it's
have
how
a
you get from A
saggy,
to B.
yeah, and not
Exactly.
not have a saggy middle.
Yeah, saggy middle, can't
Yeah,
have that, not my
yeah,
age. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, that's the thing. You think, which route will I take to get from, this lovely beginning to this quite
Mm,
tragic denouement,
mm,
what will happen in between.
yeah.
So I think that's the biggest challenge really
Because
for
most
me.
writers are, in my experience, most writers are pantsers.
Hmm.
So Anne Cleeves, I've been to seen her in talking um, in at literary festivals a few times, and she and PD James and the likes, very much pantsers. So they'll get an idea and then standard sort of typical crime format where there's the body at the beginning and the detective has to, when you've got your pool of characters, that has to be one of those.
Hmm.
And so they write fairly linearly from start to finish, and then she says that it's if it's a surprise to her at the end who the once she gets to writing the first draft who the murderer is, then she likes to think that it's going to be a surprise to the reader, and
Hmm.
then she'll go back and put in red herrings and the threads that will take that, so it's not a complete surprise. You know, you don't
Hmm.
have a pool of characters A to F and it turns out to be character G, which I have come across before. They literally just appear for the first time in the last but one scene, and then
Mm.
all of a sudden they're the murderer.
That's what they call, it's like the hand of God, isn't it? You've got
Yeah.
that with things like The Wizard of Oz, where you can hear Frank L. Baum is wondering how will he get Dorothy out of this terrible mess. So he brings in a
Mm.
witch on a broom that no one's ever heard of. She hasn't
Right.
appeared before, and she
Oh,
comes and
right.
says, "Do you want to lift home to Kansas? Hop on,"
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah.
And you think, "Oh, what a
Yeah.
swizz,"
Yes. Yes.
So it's very obvious when people do that.
Mm.
But it's funny you mention that because one of I think the first thriller I wrote. I showed it to a writer friend who knows what he's talking about, and
Mm.
he said, yes, it's a good story, but he said it's far too short. You're a few thousand words short. You've
Okay.
got to lengthen it. But I just ended it with the death of the sort of bad person. So I
Mm.
thought, what can I do? I can't bring him back. But I
Right.
actually suddenly realised I had a very, I think anyway, very clever idea about it. You know, the end wasn't the end. So
Ah,
there's always that idea as well. You know, how can
yeah.
you? I didn't want to look as though another bit had been tacked on just to make the book X thousand words.
Mm.
But I suddenly thought this could, it could possibly be that the end is not the end, that there is
Right.
a lot more danger to
Right.
come.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge as well, that kind of
Yes.
thing.
Well,
Well,
I think
you've,
because you write standalones and series, do
uh-huh.
you find because I've found with writing some, A, you've got to remember everything.
Mhm.
So presumably you have a sort of fairly substantial notes system where you remember that the minor character in one book, if they come in back in another book, that he's got blue eyes and is 6'3" and he's still, aha, oh, index
I have
cards.
index cards in a little
Right.
box.
Oh, sweet.
So all my characters are in there with
Yeah.
every detail about hair color, eye color,
Right. Right.
because I'd started doing that when I think it was Ian Rankin said somebody wrote to him and said, "I love your latest umpteenth book, but
Mm.
the constable in it. Do you realize you killed him off in book one?"
Yes. Yes.
So I
See,
thought,
it's
"Ooh,
yeah. See, it's absolutely fine to kill off. They say you can kill off people, but don't kill off animals or children.
oh yes,
And I went to a talk, Stephen Booth, and he said he was talking about fan mail, about the letters he gets and reviews he gets, and he said the most fan mail he's ever got is when he killed off a cat, and that was old age. He didn't even have it run over. It
oh,
was, and there's a TV series which I base the dog from O. Henry in on the dog in an animated American TV series called Family Guy, and they killed him off in one of the episodes, and literally half of America went up in arms, and there were petitions, so they had to bring him back. And
do you
he
know
was
that
he was the main
my
character
character?
really, and yeah,
Ah,
he
well,
wasn't supposed to be, but yeah, he was the
I actually
dog.
did it in one of my books. I killed both a cat and a dog. And it was only later on I started reading this advice that said you shouldn't do that. But
Mm,
basically, I had a retired hitman who his best friend was blown up in a car bomb. And he was very upset about that. And he thought about taking revenge. But
right.
then somebody also poisoned his rescue greyhound. So
Okay.
that was the catalyst that made him decide he was going to go and kill a few
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably in the book before that. I
Okay.
had somebody being assassinated in their own home, and their cat died mainly for lack of food. So
Right.
when the hitman returned to actually steal a few things,
Mm,
he got rid of the cat's corpse as well.
right.
But so far, nobody's complained.
Okay.
It must be
Okay.
germane to the story, I
I
suppose.
guess that, yes, the level of all that. So yes. So what's next for you, Denise? I read in your website's bio that you've got some FBI books coming up.
Yes, well, I thought I'd try something completely different because many years ago, it's 24 years ago actually, I spent a month in France on a law enforcement officer's course
Mm,
with people from lots of other countries, law enforcement officers, and there were policemen from all the European states, and there were four of us Brits on the course. It's always very popular with the Brits. But
mm,
one of the guys was an American FBI agent,
okay.
Brendan, and he was basically in the evening when he'd had a few drinks in the bar. He would get quite chatty and he would tell you all about his operations and
Ah,
not his medical operations, but his
yeah. Yes.
FBI ops
Yep.
and
Yep.
how they worked and how the setup was in Washington and
Mm,
everything. And I stored that away in the back cupboards in my brain. Thought
mm,
one day that'll come in handy, that
right.
knowledge. And I was reading an academic paper, funnily enough, on potential misuse of DNA.
Mm,
And I thought this could be something really big. It would happen in the USA and it would involve the FBI. So I've written the book. I'm just trying to find a publisher with American connections, that would publish it both sides of the transatlantic,
sure.
of the Atlantic. And also,
Mm,
I'm starting to write a sequel to it. So it's hopefully going to be a little series
okay.
based in FBI's Pennsylvania Avenue
Right.
operations. And we'll see how that goes.
And did you engage him as your consultant? Do you have people you can? Because I mean, having been in the industry, I would imagine you've got loads of people who you can consult with anything you're not too sure about,
Yes,
rather
it
than
really does
our
help.
friend. Mm,
And in fact, with postings overseas, you get to know people doing a similar work to yourself in for other countries.
mm,
And it's like a small chums club, and so basically we'll
right.
still keep in touch. And
Yeah.
one of my best contacts actually was sort of my oppo who works for the Irish government, so he has lots of stories. And
Right.
whenever I need to know anything official, like how would the Irish police tackle such and such, I'll
Yeah.
just drop him
He's
an
your
email. And
go-to. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I've got a contact in Japan as well, so
Okay.
there's quite a lot of potential if you still have contacts. And
Mm,
I get a lot of my ideas from current affairs, all open source stuff, from newspaper
sure.
items and incidents, that kind of
Mm,
thing.
mm,
So yeah, having contacts is essential, I think.
yeah. And you're so widely travelled, and your bio again says you've been to 20 countries and you speak 6 languages. Presumably, if you've set a book in Moscow, one of them is Russian.
Funnily enough, it's not.
Okay.
um,
I know
I had to.
Dardiet, and that's it.
I had to use one of those online translators. So
Mhm.
you learn to say things that you actually how they're spoken as well. Because I'm thinking if my publisher gets around to doing audible versions of my books, which she said she would,
Right.
I might have to do, because there's so many different languages in them, I might have to do the audio myself. But
Right.
things like "хорошо," which means well done, when you've
Okay.
just
That's
killed
always
someone
good
and
to know.
your boss calls you.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Well done. Good
Yeah.
murder, that one.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, no, I speak Urdu, Hindi, and Punjabi. So the Kohat connection, I was able to use a bit of that in there.
Mm,
And one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is to improve my Portuguese, because I lived in Portugal for 4 years,
mm,
didn't have the opportunity to learn the language before I went there.
mm.
And so I had to learn it on the hoof, as it were. I learnt most of it chatting to taxi drivers.
Right.
So I haven't got a great grasp of tenses. Most of my conversations about the weather and food.
Okay.
So
In
what I've
present tense.
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
just get in a taxi and you say, "Oh, the weather," and they say, "Oh yeah," and
Right.
you say, "Yesterday," and they say, "Oh yeah, it was better yesterday." And
Right. Okay.
tomorrow, and they'll say, "Oh yeah,
Yes.
tomorrow's going to be fine." So I'm
Right.
taking
So you,
notes in the
oh,
back.
very good. Yeah, brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Is there any way you'd live if you didn't live in the UK, if you had the choice now to live
Oh,
forever as your forever home?
well, I'd love to live in Scotland because my daughter and son-in-law have moved to Edinburgh, and then I could get
Mhm.
involved, hopefully, in bloody Scotland. That would be nice.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Edinburgh's lovely because
oh, it's isn't it?
Ian Rankin's
Yeah,
there, and
yeah.
Kate Atkinson, one of my favourites. She's there.
There's also a
She's
darkness about the place, which I think
mm.
lends itself to thinking up plots, murder plots, and
Yes.
so on. But
All the back streets, Flesh
yeah,
Market Close.
yes,
Yes.
all those the closes are incredible, aren't
Yeah,
they?
aren't they?
But I think because I have connections with Ireland, particularly Belfast. I
Mm.
think I'm from Manchester originally, but Belfast I
Mm.
think is my second favourite city.
Right.
So I would be quite happy to live there. But my husband
Mm.
doesn't want to live anywhere but Buckinghamshire, so a
Okay.
bit stuck.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Anything else you'd like to add? So another interest. Did you go from school into how did you get into the intelligence?
Well, essentially, I joined the Home Office and particularly the Immigration Service, which no longer
Mm,
exists in the same sort of format.
okay.
And it's with them that I got posted overseas a lot. And then,
Mm,
of course, something quite interesting happened in 1998 when peace broke out in Ireland. It left MI5 with about two-thirds of their workload missing because
right.
a lot of their concentration had been on Irish terrorism.
Sure.
So they looked around for another major area of criminality and
Mm,
internet with an international sort of theme to look at.
mm,
And at that time, I was running the one of the managers in the Immigration Intelligence Unit, and we were investigating people traffickers and people smugglers and
mm,
all kinds of cross-border crime that involved smuggling people. And
mm,
so basically, they wanted to latch on to us and help us out. And that was where I had some interesting attachments and
mm,
working relationships that lasted quite a few years.
mm,
But working overseas is funny because when I first went overseas, well, no, I had several postings on my own, but then I went, as a diplomatic wife, I went to Pakistan.
Mm,
And for the first few weeks, I was followed everywhere by plainclothes police officers.
mm.
And I couldn't work it out because in Pakistan, when you go on to buy food for a dinner party, you don't just go to a supermarket. You have to go to half a dozen different bazaars. There's the meat market is one side of town, dairies on the
Right,
other, vegetables somewhere else again. So you'd
right.
spend your entire day driving around from place to
Yeah,
place just to
yeah.
shop for dinner. And everywhere
So,
I pulled in, there was a police car pulled in behind, and I thought they're following me. So it was mentioned up at the our embassy, and they said,
mm.
they've obviously decided because of the languages your wife speaks that she's the
Oh,
spook. So can you tell her to carry on because while they're following your missus, they're not
oh,
following the
they're
real
not following.
spook.
Wow. Has that
So
gone? Has that
yeah,
gone in a story?
it's gone in my memoir, but as I have to
Right.
pass that through the Home Office, that'll take a while.
Okay.
But essentially that was fun because I used to sort of put a bit of a dash on so that they'd have to keep pace with me, and I had a
Yeah,
slightly faster car than they did. And
yeah.
one occasion, four police officers turned up sharing a single motorbike.
Right.
Um, but there were times when it did get dangerous. I mean, I have actually been tear gassed.
Wow.
I was mortar bombed, but that was at Heathrow.
Right.
I've been held hostage as well. So had some quite scary times, which
Right.
will be in the memoir
Yeah,
eventually.
yeah. Because
But
I
all in all, it has been great fun.
I had a very ordinary upbringing, and I came to writing at the ripe old age of 38, even though I've been an avid reader. And what you were saying about your dad and reading, um, going to the library, I was at the library, literally maxed out I think it was 6 books at the time as a child, and I'd read them within a couple of days and then take them. And so we were back and forth, and it was handy. It was on the way to the swimming pool. So we'd drop them off, then go swimming, and then pick up
Mhm.
some more and go home again. But libraries are,
Oh,
in this country, it seems to be a soft target with budgets, and we're not going to get political. But I love the fact that literary festivals are connected because I used to be on the committee, but I'm still involved with the Beacon Lit Literary
mhm,
Festival again in Buckinghamshire, and the fact that it takes sort of almost outside sources and charity work to keep them in the spotlight and keep them running. But it's lovely the fact that you get new authors to new readers
mhm.
within a library setting. So that's the next
Yes.
time I'll be seeing you
Mhm.
is at those is at that
Well, that's the
next
thing.
month.
I think it's shameful that our libraries are being defunded as are
Mm,
other areas of leisure centres and so on.
mm,
And we have a particularly nice library with run by volunteers entirely in
mm,
Chalfont St Peter. So, having been involved with festivals myself, but for a decade now, I've been helping on the committee that runs the Chalfont St Giles and Jordan's Literary
mm,
Festival. And then I decided to try and rope a few friends in to help me put together a crime writing festival, which we did in Gerrards Cross last year.
mhm,
And that was successful. So, what we're doing now is putting our efforts into trying to keep our library going, to keep it funded.
sure,
So, with the help of yourself and some other wonderful authors, we've been doing Chiltern's Crime Quarterly events, which is where four
mm,
times a year we get some really fascinating crime writers to come into the library and give their time for free, which is very good
mm,
of you all. And the ticket prices are kept low so that we can, get an inclusive sort of audience.
sure.
And people can come in, they can meet their favorite authors, they can browse their books and have a signed copy, and they can
Mm,
ask questions. And
mm,
we hope that budding writers will come too, because people like yourself, I mean, you're a creative writing tutor,
mhm.
you're an editor. There's so much advice that you can give to somebody who wants to write, young people
Mm,
particularly.
yeah,
So that's the idea of those, and
it's brilliant.
we're having our third on the 14th of September,
Mm,
which will include yourself. So
yes.
looking
Well,
forward to that.
I went to the second one, as you know, because you were there. The
Mhm.
second one as a participant, and it was so lovely seeing. There was one lady in particular who could almost not carry the amount of books that she'd bought of
Yes.
the author. Almost everything we say, because some people will say, oh, I've read everything you've ever written.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who it was, but somebody said that at a literary festival. I think I was in the queue to buy a book. And they said, oh, we've read everything you've ever written. And he said, oh, no, no, you haven't. I've written a lot. So have you written things that will never get published?
Have I?
that yes, sort of
Mm.
almost written for whether it's pleasure or it's because a lot of authors have got maybe their first thing they ever wrote they feel is so bad that it's going to stay in a drawer and
Um,
never to see daylight.
Possibly. I mean, there have been a couple of things I've written that, with hindsight, I'm going to go back and rewrite, where there wasn't enough rising tension, where it was a
Right,
story. Or
right.
I wrote a book about, which basically it was about my grandfather and who was murdered.
Mm,
And I realized that although it's fun for me and the family to read, nobody else is going to want to read it. So maybe I should make
right.
it more of a story and
Yes.
include more of the interesting bits of his history. So
Okay.
that's the kind of thing, really. And
Right.
of course, the memoir which I've written, which is quite long, actually, surprisingly,
Okay.
my sort of life history,
Yeah.
that's going to take a long time because it's got to be approved by the Home Office.
Yes.
So
Sure. Sure.
we'll see.
Yes. Well, maybe, do you think there's a story? I suppose it's different with non-fiction because non-fiction you can almost not sensationalize it, but do you ever feel that you find a story that you can't write as non-fiction, but that would be too unbelievable as fiction?
Yes, yes, I have actually, and I would imagine that's probably true of the second book I wrote, which is called Running with Crows.
Mm,
And essentially, it was about somebody in my family tree who is not a blood relative of mine. They're related to my cousin by marriage, but
mm,
he was a black and tan. He was one of the temporary constables taken on
right.
after World War One during the Irish Troubles of the 20s.
Mm,
And he was the only black and tan hanged for murder. And actually, the murder that was committed against a magistrate, he didn't do it. It was one of his fellow black and tans that did it.
mm,
But they actually, there was a bit of a conspiracy. When I went and looked at all the official files, I could see that somebody had actually written, the sort of main prosecutor general had written, this is a very important case. We're trying to get our paid assassins off the murder charges, so we have to have a victim, and this guy's the patsy. This one's the ideal bloke that they can hang him, and then we'll start to look even-handed. If we let
right.
this guy be the sacrificial lamb, then the
Sure.
really nasty people that we've sent out to kill innocent Irish people, we can get them off the hook.
Mm,
So I wrote it, and it as non-fiction, it didn't get very emotive. But I
mm,
thought when I looked into the background and the early life of this man, he'd fought for king and country, and
mm,
he'd grown up in a slum, but nevertheless, he was a petty criminal too, but he'd made something of himself,
sure.
and he didn't deserve to hang really, and he left a
Mm,
6-week-old baby and a widow,
oh,
and so I thought writing it as fiction worked so much better. Particularly when
mm,
you write the final scene in the death cell where his wife is meeting his baby for the first time
oh,
and last time, and his wife
right.
is there, and there's heartbreak and there's recrimination. It works
Mm,
so much better as fiction than just relating the facts. To say
sure.
his wife was upset
Yes.
doesn't come anywhere near how she would have
No,
been. She was
no.
destitute.
Yeah. Because I suppose that's the ultimate show and tell. You can show in a novel, whereas in it, certainly if you're going to keep it as sometimes some films will say inspired by true events or
Yes.
based on true events. If you're writing non-factual non-fiction, then it has
Hmm.
to be as close to the truth as you're able to do
Hmm.
your fascinating, trying not to go too stray research that you love doing.
Yes.
Yes,
Actually, I think it was Doris Lessing who said that fiction makes a better job of the truth.
right.
You can actually you show people's feelings, and you put in all the extraneous detail that makes them come to
Yes,
life.
no, absolutely.
It's a much better job of it, really.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's brilliant. Well, it's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much for
Ditto. Thank you,
joining me
Morgan.
today, and I shall see you next month.
Looking forward to that, Morgan.
Yes,
Many thanks.
absolutely. Me too. Thank you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.